One more minute, our viewer count is going up. So I feel like people are.
So my thing was frozen for a couple of seconds there. Was it frozen for y'all too, or is that just me?
It was just you.
Okay. So yeah, I had a Star Trek moment there. Just wanted to let you know. So if I don't answer a question, it's not because I don't care.
Okay.
It's because there's a disruption in the space-time continuum.
Yes.
I was looking for the reference because I'm a big Star Trek geek myself. So yeah.
Right. Next Generation. The
Next
original.
Generation. I'm a big
all of
fan.
it.
See, that's impressive.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So good.
For those who are
Yes.
tuning in, we're about to start in a minute. So you are at the right webinar. Scholar Practitioner webinar.
It's not Trekkies.
For folks who
Right.
get
We're
to the
discussing.
computers. We're not random bunch of folks.
I went to a Star Trek convention recently.
Really?
Within the past year and a half, they do it here in Rosemont.
Yes, they do. I've not been to a convention ever, so I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't have my wings yet, but
I never had either, and then this was the first one because they were having a reunion for the Next Generation, like the
I
20.
remember it. I remember that being advertised. Whoops.
I want to speak Klingon at some point. This is my
Yes.
aspiration.
We have a lot in common. This is
Right? On the Duolingo app. So are you familiar with the application Duolingo?
Yeah.
They offer Klingon now, I think.
no, they don't.
Yeah. They offer like a couple of phrases, so you totally got to take advantage of it.
Absolutely going to do that. That's gonna.
Getting checked right now, actually.
Yeah. I know. I was going to say I think I have it on my phone.
No.
Oh well.
Yeah,
yes,
I haven't.
will.
No.
Okay, and I know we should probably start.
Scholar practitioner. Scholar
Practitioners.
Scholar Practitioner panel. Excited. Let's kick it off at 7:05. I'm Joliana Yee. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Loyola University program. I'm 2 months in, and so I'm very excited to have this panel and to help moderate it. Both Tina and I, and she'll introduce herself in a minute, are on the editorial board for the journal on critical scholarship for higher education and student affairs, which is in its second year. So it was actually founded and established by our PhD students in the Loyola Higher Ed program last year. So we're still very much trying to get the word out about the work that we're doing. And like I said in my initial invitation, really break down barriers around scholarship and publication and, what knowledge is valued and what knowledge is not in terms of academia, because I'm sure you can all agree that there's some iffiness around that. And what, knowledge is seen as more valuable. And so we're hoping that this webinar will create a space for us to have a dialogue about what it means to be a scholar and a practitioner, that you don't necessarily have to choose between one or the other. And yeah. And Tina, can you...
Hi, so my name is Tina Garcia, or my full name is Kristina Garcia. I am the coordinator for off-campus student life here at Loyola, and I am also in the same cohort with Joliana, so in the first 2 months of our PhD program. That I'm all those things in addition to the static picture you see all the way on the right. So if at any point it changes, that's totally normal. But that's me.
Awesome. So we have a great panel, and why don't y'all start by introducing your name, your position, and your research interests.
You have any of us go first?
No, go ahead. However you feel.
I'll be happy to start. My name is Michael Anthony. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be on this Google Hangout. My first time really doing this in this format, so I appreciate it. My role is I'm the Chief Diversity Officer and Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs here at Oakton Community College, which is in the suburbs of Chicago, the northwest suburbs. We have 2 campuses here. Research interests are around a couple of areas. One is black male retention, and really in the broader context, student of color retention and persistence. Also, leadership pedagogy. So my first love is really around leadership development and education, and that's how I got into the field, and I've moved into this space more, and I really, really, really love it. So that's who I am.
Thank you.
Do you want me to go next?
Sure.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mamta Accapadi, and I currently am the Vice President for Student Affairs at Rollins College. It's a small private liberal arts college in Winter Park, Orlando, Florida. And my research interest. Right now I'm leaning more on the administrator end. However, my research interest, I really like looking at dynamics of privilege and power and how that plays out. So when we talk about intersectionality, particularly how do the dynamics of intersectionality play out when you have what's often referred to as one-up, one-down identities? So intersections across privilege and power identities. That's actually my favorite thing to kind of grapple with and sit in. I also now have become really, really interested, I think it's probably because of the liberal arts institution, in what it takes, the skills and talents and just reflection that it takes to elevate a democratic consciousness. And so what does it mean to do democracy capacity building? And I think mainly because I think that the issues around privilege and power and democracy are actually linked. And I think if we don't make that connection soon, that could really impact the well-being of the state of our democracy. So that's stuff that I've been thinking about for now.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I guess I'm last. My name is Lesley-Ann Brown-Henderson. I'm Executive Director for Campus Inclusion and Community at Northwestern University. And I have been an interdisciplinary researcher from the very beginning. So my dissertation looked at three main bodies of literature. One is around psychology and identity. The other is kind of multicultural issues in higher education. And then the third is leadership. So those are the three areas that I'm really interested in, and how those are connected or not connected is what I constantly think about. So issues of power and privilege, how one's identities, how one becomes aware of one's identities, and then issues of power and privilege embedded in that. I've also more recently become really interested in how identity is related to social activism, and how students, and really how leadership is interconnected with that as well, and what does that mean for our students to be activists on campus, and how does that impact their identity development, as particularly racially or culturally, ethnically. So those are just some of the things I'm always interested in.
Great, thank you. So just a quick note for the viewers, there's a question feature that you can use to submit questions, and Tina will be kind of moderating and watching those. So you can either use the hashtag JCSHESA chat, or use the Google Hangout option and ask a question, and I'll check in with her every 2 questions or so, and to see if there's any reactions or just follow-up questions for our panelists. Otherwise, we have questions, and we'll just keep going through them. So thanks for joining us tonight. So why don't we start with an easy, broad question. Could you share with us a little bit about your journey in student affairs and how you arrived to your current role?
Y'all gonna make me start with every question? Is that how it's gonna work? Or?
Sure. That's the plan.
That's the plan. I'll start off to give, I know Lesley-Ann just finished talking as well. So pretty traditional route for me. I came out of undergraduate institution, NC State, North Carolina State University, so I'm a Southerner kind of at heart, and that talk about intersections of identity and all the complexities that come with that. But I came up through NC State University, large land grant institution, really felt through that experience. That, like many of us, had that conversation with a mentor who said, "Oh, you should consider student affairs." And I said, "Oh, what is that about?" And so was really a student government head in college and decided to go into student affairs, higher ed administration. So we had 2 different programs at the University of Louisville down in Kentucky. So I took the higher ed budget administration route, which I really love. I actually love that thing. And then talk about this in the research interest, but organizational management and development is a joy of mine. I feel like I get to do that a lot in a lot of areas of my life. So I went through my master's program there and did my housing stint. I did my chops in housing for 2 years as a resident director and learned a lot about, I guess, the multifaceted aspect of student affairs and all the functional areas within that space. As soon as I was leaving there, I had a mentor, Dr. Denise Gifford, and she was a supervising, she's a vice president of student affairs at the time. She's at Widener University now in Pennsylvania. She had invited me to apply for a position at Louisville for the leadership office. They were going to create a leadership development coordinator position that used to live in student activities but had been moved to a more developmental side of the house and wanted me to be the inaugural person in that position. And so I couldn't pass that up for people who are looking around for careers and thinking about the field. Somebody who said to me once from Louisville said, "It's good to be best, but it's better to be first." And a lot of that time when you get to start a program, it's really fun. You get to really put the work, everything that you want to do. So I was able to do that there, and then was invited maybe 3 years later. At this point, I had started my PhD work, so I took a break from master's for about a year, and decided to get into the PhD because knowing me, I knew I wouldn't go back if I stayed working too long without getting the PhD. So I decided to let me start that part time. So I did that part time while I was living, right? So at that point, I got married, had my first child, my first and only child, by the way, first and only child. Started a new job at the University of Louisville, was invited to, again, be the inaugural director for our cultural center there. And this is where Lesley-Ann and I will later connect. We just come to find out a few minutes ago. So did that work, and entirely through that process, what really anchored me in the process was my professional involvement. What kept me current in the literature, what kept me current in my circle, what kept me supported, and which continued this love affair with student development and student affairs, was always my involvement in my state and regional organizations. It gave context to that this work is bigger than me and bigger than my college, and my problems never seemed so big when I could connect with other constituents, other professionals and practitioners. My students' issues seemed to be better put in context, and so I was just a better professional because of that work. So I led the state association for ACPA, which is called CPAC in Kentucky, and worked with them and really redesigning that body. I was very involved in NASPA at the state level as well, but then really took off in ACPA. And so did that, and then I moved. I looked for new opportunities and saw this job opening up in the Chicagoland area for this 2-year college, which I didn't attend a 2-year college. I taught at one in Louisville for a semester or two. And I always worked with student leaders from the community college sector through Leadership, where I used to be a co-lead for. And so I knew community colleges were power, and plus this emerging conversation around the utility, but also the need for really strong leadership in the community college space. And so I saw the position and said, this is a really sexy position, and so I'm going to look at this. And kind of after that, realized it was at a 2-year, and said, okay, let me go check this out. And so I did. I came to the North Shore of Chicago and fell in love with the campus, the people here, the energy, the potential, the possibility of the campus itself, but also just the work. The work is the work. And we could talk more about 2-year, 4-year dynamics, but we're here to serve students and a mission committed to our district. And that is an important, that you don't leave that behind no matter where you go. And so I was hooked. And so I came here in 2013, and I've been here ever since. And I love the work. I get to live both of my passions, both in the diversity world, as the Chief Diversity Officer, and all that comes with that, from compliance to programming to climate to faculty and staff hiring, all of that space, to also my student affairs love, which around the conduct area, disability services. I'm the second in command of our division here, which is a powerful experience for me to be able to do my diversity work, but anchored in the Division of Student Affairs. But still get to work with faculty and facilities and across the board. It really is an amazing experience, and so I've enjoyed it. And that's kind of what got me here. Still teaching, of course, in the classroom. I'm at Loyola University, working with them, as well as University of Louisville. I teach online. So that's kept me in the classroom, and that's been great. But I like my colleague said earlier, I love administration. That is what I set out to do, and that's what I'm doing now. So.
So, I'm gonna, I'm gonna start with a reflection that I had. So I'm not gonna necessarily go through like when I started, but the thing that I remember the most is I remember when I was in my master's and doctoral program, and faculty members shared with me, if you want to go into multicultural affairs, you're never going to become a vice president for student affairs. And and so I was like, well, fine, I don't want that then, because I really, like, for me, higher education was about transformation, it was about access, and it was about equity, and kind of those core values that really grounded me, and that ground a lot of us that do this work. So I start with that because I'm so grateful that I think the functional area that shapes who I am was grounded in multicultural affairs, because multicultural affairs, all the cool stuff that you hear about now that we call high impact practice and engagement, all those fancy buzzwords that AAC&U and all these different entities use, multicultural affairs has been doing that for decades, right? Partnering first-gen students of color with academic partners, right? I mean, all of those key things that we think of now as like amazing stuff we did in multicultural affairs way back when. And then I also think about what our society needs right now. So with all of the crisis incidents, all of the identity-based incidents, whether you're thinking about trans inclusion, whether you're thinking about, the race-themed party that happened on your campus, whether you're thinking about Title IX, all of those issues require a social justice mindset. And so who better than those of us that are trained in multicultural affairs that have that core understanding, and that core understanding, quite honestly, for me, while I'm so thankful for my educational experience, and I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin, I didn't get that critical reflection from my higher ed curriculum. I got that from social work. I got that from sociology. I got that from ethnic and women and gender studies. So I'm so thankful that I was able to kind of combine a curriculum that prepared me and prepared me to lead and serve the profession and our students today. And so I just wanted to lead and offer that thinking for the conversation.
Good.
I guess for me, is it echoing for you all?
A little bit.
Okay, let's try that again. So for me, my career path thus far has been pretty non-traditional for student affairs in some ways. I'll give you a little bit about my background because I think it's significant as I think about how I've created this path through student affairs. My family immigrated to the U.S. when I was 13 years old, and I went into higher education as a first-gen student not knowing anything. And also having in so many ways my blackness questioned, because I grew up in Montreal, Canada. I was Canadian, so what it meant to be black in Canada was so different than what it meant to be black in the U.S. But because of how I looked, the color of my skin, people assumed that I knew what it meant to be African American. And as a result, I felt some responsibility to learn. So in college, I studied African American Caribbean studies and was involved with our Black Student Union and did all kinds of things to try to understand what my position was in the system that I didn't understand. Also, I had a really hard time navigating the higher ed system, being first gen, and then having immigrant parents, trying to pay for the University of Miami, which is private, and expensive. I had no clue. Like literally I went to UM because it was the first pamphlet I got in the mail. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go here. I like it. Not knowing the cost of education, not knowing all the things that I needed to think about. So I think all of that really drives the work that I do every single day and how I think about the work that I do. So when I was in undergrad, there was a lot of people that I were friends with that should have gone to counseling, that needed counseling, that were struggling through their identity development, including myself, and we wouldn't go, right? We didn't go to counseling. They would think we were crazy. There was nothing that was culturally or racially relevant to us in counseling. And at some point I thought there has to be a way to create a bridge. And I didn't know what that bridge was going to be. Throughout undergrad, I worked in student activities, so my background is really in student activities, programming, and leadership. And then later I'm what used to be called the Minority Undergraduate Fellows Program, now is called the NUF Program, NASPA Undergraduate Fellows Program. I got two opportunities that literally changed the course of my life and journey. One was I did a summer internship at Texas A&M University. I'd never been to Texas, didn't know anyone in Texas, didn't really ever want to visit Texas, but somehow ended up there at the same time as a new vice president of student affairs and was interning in his office. And I was supposed to be at A&M for 6 weeks doing this internship. I ended up being there for 7 years and completed 3 graduate degrees there. In addition to that, I did the Summer Leadership Institute, which is also a summer opportunity through the NUF program, and mine was at Northwestern University. And there I met some people who have been transformational in my experience and my journey. Sheila Higgs-Burkhalter, Gwen Dungy, Janetta Cole-Brazel, these women of color, really took me under their wing and said, well, you can do this, you have what it takes to do this, and we're going to support you through your journey. So I got my degree in higher ed, student affairs from A&M, and I went straight into a PhD in counseling psychology, actually. I was really interested in identity, like I said before, and most of the foundational identity theorists are all psychologists. So if you think about Cross, if you think about Helms, if you think about all these people, they're all psychologists, so I was fascinated by that. And the whole time I was doing my doctorate, I tried to do an interdisciplinary approach, not only to my research, but also in the work that I was doing. So I was doing practicum hours in the counseling center, but I worked full-time in multicultural services there. So always trying to find a bridge between these populations as well as the work. So I worked full-time at A&M for about 5 years, went to Michigan State for a year, and then I've been at Northwestern. I'm entering my 4th year there.
Thank you for sharing your brief version of your journey. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the term scholar practitioner. What does that mean for you in your current point of your journey? What does being a scholar practitioner look like for you?
Well, it looks like us. I'm just kidding. I think that's a good question. I know you provide us with some framework for these questions. For me, it's much like us being a servant leader. A lot of times, those words just to me, I don't know any other kind of way to be when it comes to my practice, right? And so what it looks like is somebody who is thoughtful about the work that they do and realizes that the work that they do is part of a larger body of practice, a body of research, and we get our work from somewhere. It comes from something. It looks like regular partnerships with those in the academy who are teaching. And this is, again, this regardless of the institutional type, there's a conversation that you're having with people who do the teaching and who do the research, right? Realizing that that's their calling, that's their role, So it's a way to constantly build this bridge. I know we just talked about bridges and building bridges, and that I think the scholar practitioner is constantly looking to build a bridge between the things that we study and the things that we actually do. And it's fun to engage in those conversations with people who are on the heavy scholarship side. And there I think we do have pure practitioners and pure scholars, right? People who they don't see their worlds bridging, and I'm not judging that. That's not a judgment. But for I think most of us, many of us, are really thoughtful about being both and thinking about how do we bridge the two gaps. And doesn't mean that you're writing articles every year, you're publishing, but for some of us it means that. And if you're more on the scholarship side, it doesn't mean that you actually hold an administrative post. But sometimes you are getting in spaces where you're able to practice what you've researched, and get into those spaces. So to me, that's what it looks like. It looks like somebody who's conscious that we are part of a discipline, right? And disciplines require study and research, and then be able to make sense of that in a practical sense.
Yeah, I was thinking, I love that question. I think it's like work-life balance, right? There's no such thing. So it's integrated, and so when I think about a scholar practitioner, it's having an integrated praxis-based approach to how you lead and serve students. And I mean, in this case, we're talking about our profession. So I think about, and I'll give an example because I want to. I couldn't have said it better. I think Michael really captured what I would have said. But when I got to my institution and I wanted to learn about how people perceive student affairs, I treated it like I treated any qualitative research study. I mean, we, through mixed methods of qualitative narrative and quantitative data, we extracted themes, and we were able to, to get a sense of from everything from whether it's service excellence and people's assessment of the quality of our work to people's perceptions of what we do. And I did that the same way that I would have done a research study, because that training really, I think, as a scientist, I guess I would say, really helped me make data-informed decisions about where our organization goes next. So, there's that part of it being embedded into the practitioner, into our practice as practitioners. The other piece that I would say is, so I don't have my iPad around me, but on my iPad I have this app. It's called Browsing. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it or not, but essentially you can link your campus library to it, and then you can load it with all of the electronic journals, whatever, based on what your library has. And about once a month, once every 5 to 6 weeks, when journals come out with their new articles and stuff like that, people in my organization freak out because you could find the article and zap email it to people, and so all of a sudden every 6 weeks people will get oh, this is what we're talking about with the Journal for College Student Development has these things on parent engagement in higher education. And so again, and so I always try my best to be on top of what I think Michael kind of captured as the larger than us conversation. We are part of a greater conversation as we think about serving and being stewards of our students' learning experiences. And so that means not reinventing the wheel. It means engaging and hooking into that larger conversation.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Mamta and Michael have said. I think my example would be, so last year I had a huge restructuring, so I restructured all of my units, and it was grounded in the literature, right? There's a theoretical framework that we're using to think about what does it mean for these offices to work together, what is our work, and how do we do that work. And I didn't restructure and then go look for a theory. I started with the theory, right? So for me, that's how my scientist practitioner or practitioner scholar shows up. I try to go to the literature and then make sense of it for the organization and the culture that I'm a part of. So for the restructure, and this is the framework that we use is a framework called the Trisector Model of Cultural Practice. And that model said that a cultural practitioner should have a portfolio of programs and services that meet different needs but have some shared responsibility or some overlap. So a cultural practitioner should have programs and services that do cultural engagement, cultural education, and cultural development. So as I was thinking about our units, then I thought about for campus inclusion, for us to be able to meet our goals, we should have 3 units that do education programming, enrichment programming, and engagement programming or education programming, and they're separate units, but there's some overlap, right? And how does the theory then inform the way that we do our work together every single day? Part of it is the overlap is we serve, so the office that serves low-income students, some of those students are also students of color. So if they go to student enrichment services and say, you know, I'm a black student and I'm low income and I'm having a hard time building community and I need resources, my director's not going to say, Courtney's not going to say, well, sorry, I can only help you with your low-incomeness. You got to go to MSA for your blackness, right? There's some shared responsibility that we all have and some baseline knowledge that we need to have in doing this work. And the theoretical framework helps guide us in the work that we want to do. So that's one way that I see the work as a scholar practitioner.
Oh, we can't hear you. Can't read lips. No. No.
Oh no.
There, I heard you laugh.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay. Lesley-Ann, can you repeat what you said, trisector? I didn't catch that. You said.
Oh, it's called the Trisector Model of Cultural Practice.
Trisector.
Trisector.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Tina, we have a question from our audience.
Yes, we do. So Delia asked, how do we bring other practitioners into the conversation? And while I think this may have just been a preliminary question, I think it still definitely aligns with what we've been discussing so far.
Which conversation? Can I ask Delia for clarification?
Sure. I'm not sure if she's live watching the show, but this was or watching this session.
Yeah.
But
Can you repeat it again for us?
Sure. I'd say, here it is. How do we bring other practitioners into the conversation? And for the context of this discussion, maybe just bringing them in general, whether it's into these discussions that are in practical settings or just into discussions of scholarship. What are some strategies that you have found have been successful?
Mm-hmm.
So I can respond, at least in my space. I've embedded it, or I try to embed it into the culture of our practice in student affairs. So our student affairs leadership team, our directors, we meet every 4 weeks, 5 weeks, about once a month. All the directors in student affairs will come together, and there's always professional development that's part of that conversation. And usually it's looking at, okay, like, so I'll give an example. In November, our conversation is going to be about spiritual identity development. And are we engaging in the spiritual development of our students? And we talk about this holistic well-being and all of that stuff, but really have we thought about that? We have a vacancy in our chaplaincy, and so now as we're rethinking the chaplaincy, this is the appropriate time to have a conversation about that. One of the things I'll offer that I claim to talk about privilege and power, and one of the things that I need to do and continue to do a better job of is thinking about how my identity as a supervisor, as the vice president for student affairs, impacts other people, and so how that could come across as a directive or as a mandate, or I think people, like, whether I like it or not, I can come across as intimidating in that space. So I try to manage that, and yet I do have an expectation that, and that for us, that's been a culture shift. I have an expectation that if, very much like Lesley-Ann said, that if we're going to come up with a new program, it better be linked to something that's informed by, it might be unique to us, but it needs to be informed by a theoretical frame, and we need to engage it in that way. So, but, this is my 3rd year at Rollins, so that culture shift is happening gradually. I think the important thing is is if we're going to bring in our colleagues, I don't think you can force people to do things, but I do think we can encourage and nudge, and for those of us in our spaces of power, leverage that thoughtfully.
Mm-hmm.
The more I've listened to your response, Mamta, thank you for that, and the question itself. I sat on the advisory board for the journal for critical scholarship, and so as that work was being really pulled together, which I think the doc students and others involved did an exceptional job doing that. That was a lot of the question. I think it was really the core of the question was how do we get people to see scholarship published as something that they could be a part of. And so for me, I think so recently Oakton hosted a Justice Summit here in the North Shore, made up of a call from an organization called Open Communities, which is really committed to creating justice spaces within housing and transportation and a number of other areas, which I commend them for doing. And one of the questions that we led off with, I was fortunate enough to sit on the plenary with other folks from the community, including one of our representatives, to talk about this idea of how do you welcome people in. And so I keep going back to this. I'm gonna blog about this because I got to get it, unpack it more in my head. But I think about this notion of how do we get more people to the table. Oftentimes our orientation is that of a welcoming space, right? So we welcome people. Welcoming people is much like we welcome our friends and families to come see us sometime, right? So I'll tell Mamta, I'll tell the rest of the people on the panel, if you're ever in Rogers Park, you're always welcome at my place, right? Now, if Mamta shows up with a sleeping bag next week and says, hey, I'm going to crash here for a couple of weeks because you said I was welcome, well, my first response would be, well, I said you were welcome, but I didn't invite you to my place. I didn't invite you in. And so I want to create a distinction between welcoming and inviting spaces, right? And I look at our campus, and I told somebody asked me at the summit, they said it's Oakton, an inviting place versus a welcoming place. And I said, I think we have some work to do there. I said, I think we do welcome folks, right? I think Northwestern could speak to this, right? We have of course, nobody's actively, that's how oppression and privilege works, right? Nobody's actively pushing people out. It's never the case. Nobody's saying you got to leave. Sometimes they are, right? But that's not usually the problem. It's usually a problem that people just don't really feel invited. I don't feel like I can come in. I don't feel like I can really stay. I don't feel like I can fit in. I don't see myself. I can't put my pictures out. I don't eat the same time you do. It's all of these things that require us giving something up to really invite people in. And I don't think we do that. So around this question of how do we get more people at the table around this conversation to professional development in the shared governance of your space in your college, it's about the analysis of are we really inviting them in? And I think when we do that, I think they come to the table. I think they come to conferences. I think they come to these conversations. But throwing out a message to say, hey, this is happening, that's the welcoming thing. But I don't know if we reach out to our colleagues. And I think about my own colleague who happened to mention today that she would be on this webinar. And I said, oh, I'm glad, because I certainly didn't invite her to be on the webinar. I sent out the note, right, to say, hey, come on in, come check it out if you want to. But people listen to invitations, and I think we have to do that more.
For me, I think often about how do we make this relevant and accessible to everyone, right? I think anyone can find the articles or whatever the case may be, and if there's anyone on the webinar who I have the pleasure of working with every day, any of the staff that I work with, I haven't presented this idea to you all yet. So part of it is, when we have our monthly all staff meetings, we rotate staff to present an article that they're interested in, that they find applicable to the work that they do, and just spending a couple minutes talking about that and what it could mean for our work as a team. I think that way, that if people are interested in different intersections or different ways of looking at the work, then it's something that feels relevant to them, but then it's knowledge that they're sharing across the organization. So I think little things like that could also make a difference in how people feel like they can access the scholarship and how they can talk about it and how relevant it is to their everyday work.
Yes. Thank you. So Gina has another question.
We actually have another question. They're coming in. How do you balance theory, literature, your personal knowledge, lived experiences, and student voices as scholar practitioners?
I guess I'll start a little bit. I think when I was going through working or PhD and school straight through, there's a lot of people that didn't have any work experience, and there's always kind of this divide, right? Like those people who have lots of work experience but no PhD, and then people who have a PhD and no work experience, and it's kind of like this tit for tat sometimes. And what I found is that I understand the value of having both and why that's important. Knowing the research, knowing the theories is one thing, but being able to see how it's applicable or not when you work every day, I think that's like the science of the work is the theory, right? You have a theory, it was tested in this way. The art of it is being able to apply it to your campus, so the nuances of your campus, your population, student demand, your personal experiences. And I think that's the art of it. And the art, you only learn by experience. You don't necessarily learn in a classroom. So I think, when I think about the question, Tina, I really think about how important it is to have both, like to be really in the scholarship and knowing what it's saying, but having the experience or test fitting it in different ways to your population and your context. I think that's really important as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was as I was reflecting on the question. Generally, I don't know if balance works for anything. I mean, I think how do we have this thoughtful integration of the theories that that again have been tested, that how our work and how our decisions are informed by said theories, and the other thing that I would say is, for me, integrating that with empowering or creating an environment where students are empowered. To me, and not that I should rank things, but I mean the student is the most important human, period. Right, and so I do always, I mean, that's one perspective that I will always say, like, if you're talking about it, there is no balance. I mean, theory can inform my perspective, and then my intuition and my relationships help me connect in an artistic way. To use, I loved that reference of distinguishing the science and the art, but and it's my, there's knowledge that we get, and then there's wisdom that we have from our lived experience, and Laura Rendon with Senti Pensante Pedagogy talks a lot about this. Again, answer informed by theory. How do we become agents of encouraging an environment where people can integrate the knowledge that they gain with the wisdom that they've had for multiple generations, for them to then pursue their hopes and dreams in a college environment, whether that's if that's a career conversation or it's an activism conversation. I mean, I see myself as a conduit, not as, again, there's power attached to the title, but I always like to remember that I'm a conduit. Things like I can connect, I can leverage, and if one of my mentors, former supervisor, used to say, clear the way or get out of the way. So how do I kind of be an agent of support by either clearing the way for folks or getting out of the way? And again, the theoretical frame usually tends to inform which of those options it might be.
All that, yes, and I think the idea is to be intentional. Be intentional about doing it. So you ask how you balance all those things. There's not an answer about any given moment of what mix. It's not a recipe, right? And so I think it's much like I'm a parent, so I have a 6-year-old little girl, and I think about it with parenting, right? So you have all of this. You have this theory and literature, but then you have all of this lived experience, and you have all these others who are telling you what to do and how to do it. And at what point do you take mom's advice or grandma's advice more than you take the parenting book? More do you take what you feel your gut says more than what your child says, right? They need. And again, as they get older, I have a 6-year-old, so her needs are, what she says she needs has to be scrutinized. But as she gets older, 13, right, 10, she'll start to say, this is what I need, though I may think, no, this isn't what you need. So there's no answer to how you balance it, but you must, right? And so I think the idea is the bigger question is, how do you be intentional and make it a part of your practice? And so instead of this is where people fall short. They fall back on the gut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've been doing this job for 25 years. I know what to do. And that's not appropriate. I think what we have to do as scholar practitioners is you're going to say, or practitioner scholars, right? We don't need to put one in front of the other, but you go and you say, let me talk to my colleagues. I'm going to call Lesley-Ann at Northwestern because
Mm-hmm.
I can put away any pride that she can tell me what I need to do or help me think about what I need to do, or let me think about what I've done before, and let me go and check out the literature about what this is saying. And you know what? I need to talk to my colleagues here. And you know what? I need to probably talk to the students about what we should do in this situation. And you're blending that together. And where we fail is where I think we get set into one of those things that you mentioned, be it an over-reliance on the literature, because the literature sometimes is just not appropriate for the context. Particularly as I work in a 2-year environment, I find that a lot of the literature is slanted in our laws, indeed. I'm also the Title IX coordinator here. Did I forget to mention that? So I'm the Title IX coordinator at Oakton. And a lot of our laws are slanted towards 4-year spaces, plain and simple. That's not a judgment for what's good or bad or better or worse. It's just reality. And so I can't inform all of my decisions from either the literature or from even mandates that come from the state based on just what they say or do. I have to contextualize that appropriately. So it requires you being intentional, and I think in listening to yourself and those around you and the literature as appropriate.
Can I add something? So, I want to use an example of how I think this played out, at least at my institution last year. So we had students, and again, we're a small, really white liberal arts college, lots of intersections of lots of privilege. And so for the courage that students take, particularly students of color, take to engage in any kind of activism, I think it takes a lot of courage. And so we had, our students engaging in Black Lives Matter protest. And this, of course, resulted in nasty yik-yak related things, which then created an even greater response. I mean, this, again, not unique to my institution. I remember, so as a student, I was involved in things like this myself. And I remember, as a student and as an early professional, where all I wanted was the VP of Student Affairs to sit with us and not try to fix it, but to be in it with us, right? And I felt that the VP of Student Affairs, I mean, whether it's positional or otherwise, showed up in a space of as an agent of the institution, which we are, but you're not an agent of the institution only, right? And I think what the scholar practitioner role has allowed me to do, I think, is elevate the humanity of the conversation. It's not forgetting that, right, isn't that what critical perspectives are all about, right? That narrative voices are valid. The stories and lived experiences of people are valid. And so I remember convening the conversation. So it was like this weird test for me. Am I going to be the type of vice president that I critiqued, or am I going to be someone different, right? Like I've somehow went from critiquing the man to becoming the man. I joke about that. Like the man is now this Indian American woman. But I remember, the students' very, impassioned plea in saying the administration doesn't care about us. Now I'm sitting in front of them as the administration, many of my colleagues, direct reports in the room. And I didn't feel the need to defend that. In fact, I did quite the opposite. I said, you're right. We need to be better. And I was like, raise your hand if you're part of the administration, and all the staff that were in the room, raise their hand. I was like, we are the administration, and we need to do and be better. And my commitment is that we are going to stay in it with you. I didn't make excuses. I didn't talk about what the institution's committed to. I said, we're going to be in this with one another. Because I didn't feel the need to defend my good, I didn't feel the need to defend the practitioner part of my work. I was able to step back and say, wow, I mean, again, from a critical narrative, there are people talking about their lived experiences. There are people talking about oppression, right? Aren't these like tenets of critical race theory, right? And able to say, wow, okay, the data is coming to me in the form of these really, really rich and valid spaces. What I do and how I'm a steward of these narrative voices make every difference to the lives of the students and the quality of our community. And so I just wanted to offer a practical application of what that looks like in scenarios like that many of us have been a part of or have seen.
That's great. Thank you. I think that something that I often hear from practitioners is that where do you find the time? Does scholarship drive your work, or does it work drive your scholarship? Which way do you think it flows more for you?
Well, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I would say I thought Michael offered a really thoughtful response in that it's intentional, right? So for me right now, I'm in a newer role, and my institution's going through a lot of change. So right now, I need to be an informed practitioner scholar, right? Or a scholar practitioner. Well, the noun that needs to be a practitioner, and the adjective needs to be the descriptor of how I do my work, which is scholar. But you find pockets and moments, right? So when things are compelling, I recently wrote a blog post because I was really uncomfortable with everyone jumping on the I stand with Ahmed bandwagon. But it was because, and Michael said something about I had to, unpack that, and I was feeling really uncomfortable because we're all talking about jumping on this bandwagon, but we're not talking about how we contribute to oppression every single day. All of us do. And so that wasn't necessarily, didn't have references or things like that, but I felt the need to write that blog and put it out there, if it was going to be embraced by folks or critiqued by folks, whatever the case may be. But one thing that I will say is that I never say no. If I am asked to write something, I will never turn it down. So I will find a way to make that work, because I think that, what I have not done the best of doing, and I should actually, it's not me. Like I have not found a discipline or a practice to actively submit to journals. But if there's a book chapter, on Asian American identity, API identities, passionate research area of mine, you bet I'm going to find a way, to write or collaborate with folks to engage in that piece. So I think it's recognizing what your capacity is and where your well-being and joy is. So because I don't think about balance, if you think about what maximizes your sense of joy and wholeness and do that, for me, sometimes the writing is a great break from day in and day out serving as administrator. Then it actually becomes relaxing. It doesn't feel like work. So those are just some thoughts that I have.
Thank you.
There's this great article on LinkedIn, and I think it's more conversation about it. It's not it's not novel, but for some reason it resonated with me. That's why I think people should write and blog and things, because things resonate differently with different people. But it talked about work-life blending, right? And so much of my career, I stopped trying to do the balance thing. And what I mean is that not that I don't pay attention to self-care, but so much of my caring for myself is wrapped up in my career. And so I'm trying to be really cautious about how I say this. I don't want to send the wrong message that you have to be a workaholic, right? Yeah. And one of my students, former students, he's a friend now, colleague at Roosevelt University. He and I had a dinner, him and his family, yesterday, and he referred to me as a workaholic, and I kind of recoiled at that thought. Not really, I was too busy emailing something, so I probably didn't really recoil the way I needed to. But it was in the back of my mind that I don't feel like a workaholic. I feel like even here now, like I'm finishing now. This is about normal time. Maybe about 7 is when I finish here at Oakton anyway. The reality is, though, I think there's so much fluidity between my work and this. And so as I work, I'm a regional officer for a Region 4 East for NASPA. And so as I go home, I may be making calls or emails about that, while I'm watching Netflix, right? While watching Heroes or whatever on TV. And when my daughter's here, she oftentimes accompanies me to a speaking engagement. So if I go speak or working with some people on the weekend, I have her with me. And I don't see it as a distraction from my life. I see it as part of my life, much like I have to compartmentalize the fun that I have in my life. I can't go around rampantly having fun all the time, or just watching TV or whatever it is I do in my spare time. I can't let that dominate my life. I have to blend it in with everything else. I try to do that, and then when you make time for those things that are important to you, and those things that you don't make time for, you need to have a good conversation with yourself about how important is it. Me as well. Journal articles and publishing in large Tier 1 articles has not been a priority for me. How do I know that? Because I haven't made time for it. And so I kind of tell that sends a message to me, and I don't feel a loss at it, right? It's not just something I'm not doing and I feel like I'm missing something. I haven't made the time for that, and when I want to make the time for that, I will make the time for that, and that will become something that's important to me to do. But so yeah, I think you make the time for what's important, and you try to blend those things in your life. And when I disengage, I disengage. When I break, I break, and so I can do that, and that's the kind of space that I live in because of the way I blend my work and my life.
I think so. Part of critical perspective is really valuing people's narratives or individual narratives, and for me, writing grounds me because I struggle with writing. I didn't, like I said, I didn't grow up in the U.S. I didn't start taking English classes, like writing classes, until 7th grade or something like that. So it's not a place that I feel very confident in. I'm confident in my research ability or how I understand the literature, but the writing, although I'm not a horrible writer, it's just a place that brings me pause, right? And when I write, I work through all of my identities and my own narrative to be able to get at a place to finally put pen to paper. So for me, writing, I guess, is cathartic in that way, and it helps ground me in my own narrative so that I never get too far away from myself and my own story. And the question around, does scholarship drive my work or vice versa? It's interesting now, being an executive director and overseeing several units. One of my directors in particular, he always says to me, "You need space to think. We need you to have space to think because you're helping to drive this kind of, like this ship, for lack of a better word." And part of this space to think is also thinking about how I integrate the scholarship that I know or what I'm learning into the work that we need to do, right? Like, how do we understand our contemporary student, or what college is about, or what's out there in terms of best practices? All those things help inform how I provide vision or direction or strategy to my team and allows them to do their work. So I think right now scholarship is helping to drive my work because it's me making the space to be able to incorporate those things and then provide that or help guide my staff, because I have an extremely talented staff who does work and does it really, really well. And that's now my role, right? I used to be the doer, and I like to be the doer. That's what I'm good at. I can get things done. Mm-hmm. But now the doing is me thinking, right? The doing is me creating space for my staff to be able to do their work, to hone their skills, and to impact the students and make a name for themselves. And that's a different kind of doing for me.
If I could just echo and just how beautiful that was, Lesley-Ann. I mean, that they do need you to think, right? And not the way she said, she said need. It's not that we want you to think.
Yeah.
And that's for us as we decide where you want to play, what level and what where in the organization you want to do your work. That's an important distinction, right? And thinking about what is the organization, what does the college, the institution, the university need for its leaders. Oftentimes, the important stuff is the scholarship, is the trying to frame the experience and the vision for your staff, and the urgent things tend to get in the way, right? So the important versus urgent, stuff that catches you up every day, and the emails and when you get drawn in to do because somebody else can't do it, and again, organization size all dictates some of that. So I think she said that so well, and that is a reality of sometimes that agenda is driven by your role and what becomes more important for you.
Thank you. I definitely relate to what you shared, Leslie, in terms of like when it comes to writing, I'm just like, what's going on? Yeah. I think part of that, is our socialization around like what value add we can bring to a space that doesn't reflect us most of the time.
Yeah.
And so we're almost at that time, but I wanted to give you all a chance to perhaps share some last reflections, perhaps to folks who are currently in programs or new professionals. How would you advise them in terms of remaining in scholarship, right? Because I think often as practitioners, we're so bogged down with reactionary things that we don't have time to think. So like, how do we create space and prioritize that?
Well, I'll jump in. Make it easy for yourself. It's too easy to stay connected. We stay connected to everything in every other aspect of our life. So again, even take it one step at a time. Even if you can't commit to reading everything all the time, you need to be subscribed to regular kind of journals. Your professional associations do that. So I like to look at it as from a functional area. So what is your functional area journal, newsletter, publication that kind of comes out? What is the professions work, right? So Journal of College Student Development, literally when I get a journal in, I open it and go through, right, just the header. It's a regular practice. Go through the articles that have been published and kind of flag the ones that you really want to tackle first for your interest or for your functional area. If you need advice on what those are, please, I know all of us are welcome to tell you what we kind of subscribe to do that, but find a way to constantly get that. The Chronicle daily feeds, right? The Community College daily publication. I open that every day. I don't just delete them. I open them. I look to see what's there, at least by the title, and I pull things open. I wish I could show you my desktop, but then it runs across, and there are things that I will read as I need to get to them because I'm committed to making sure that happens. And so set that aside. I think it's important to contribute in a writing process. So try. Don't feel like, and I hear this voice of like, what do I have to contribute in a space either that's really saturated or one that doesn't really reflect who you are, your identities. There are ways to get that stuff out there, and particularly, and we're not talking about the JCSD, for instance. There are newsletters that come out from the commissions within ACPA, within the professional associations within the region. There are different kinds of in NASPA and also all of the different functional areas. There are opportunities to put something out there. So be bold in doing that and seek support in how you want to make that happen. So that's my advice for really staying anchored in there. Don't look at it as an add-on. If you want to stay current and relevant and continue to advance, whether you want to again stay in your role for the foreseeable future or you want to move into different roles that are higher in the division or in the area, either option is going to benefit from having some kind of presence and commitment to scholarship in reading. So it doesn't matter, but make it part of your practice, make it part of your day. And engage your supervisor and colleagues about that.
Wow, I join all of that. When people ask for advice, I can tell you what's right for me. I just center your sense of wholeness and trust the wisdom within you, right? So I think the only reflection that I have is that the field of higher education is changing and changing now faster, than ever before. And so I would encourage you to imagine the identity and the experiences that you want and then create that. So I think for myself, for the longest time, I internalized a certain narrative of what I was able to do and what I was capable of doing, and I would just say trust your wisdom about what you need. I feel incomplete if I'm not in the classroom, and if I like when I'm in the classroom, I'm a better administrator, and because I'm an administrator, I'm a better educator, and because I'm grounded in academic literature, I do all of those things, I think, better than I would without them. That gives me joy. It's not a contest, it's not a competition, so I think finding the methodology that works for you that then elevates your sense of self and cultivates a sense of joy and wholeness in what you do.
I agree with both Michael and Mamta. I think something that I'd offer that's a little bit different. I think probably year 2 in my job, I started getting what I called intellectually bored a little bit. So I was missing being involved in some kind of scholarship, either discussion or something more research-based. And at that time, like now with the restructure, I have my full of it, but then I didn't. And I remember reaching out to Dr. John Dugan and saying, hey, I know you're at Loyola. I don't know if there's anything that you're working on that I could give some time. You know, I probably couldn't give as much time as if I were a graduate student, but I'm happy to participate. And he said, actually, I'm working on this book, and I'd love for you to be a part of my book club. So Tina, that's where I met Tina, and started participating, you know, in these discussions about deconstructing and reconstructing leadership theory through the lenses of social identity, which, I mean, gave me chills. I was so excited. And I talked to my supervisor about that, right? Because there was maybe I had to leave on Friday a little bit early to make these meetings and how long this was going to be, and it was something I was able to negotiate because it was something that was important to me. But I reached out and asked. He didn't necessarily reach out to me or anyone else, and it was me, one professional. Well, no, Tina was a professional too.
Yeah.
Another university, but two of us, and some PhD and master's students who were spectacular, you know, and I offered something a little bit differently because I was working, I was doing the work every day and could provide my perspective and then hear their perspectives. So for me, that was such a rich experience, something that I'll always treasure, and I'm so glad that I was willing to reach out and ask the question.
That's great.
Definitely.
Thank you all so much. And that's all the time we have left. I really enjoyed, and Tina did as well, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Hearing all your narratives and spending this hour with you all. Definitely, I think our audience got something out of it too. So thank you all so much, and have a good night.
Good night.
Take care. Thank you.